All right, we're going to build a little app called Tippy to allow us to provide a tip amount where a user could type in, let's say, 80.50 is their bill amount, and then they could pick from our drop-down list preset to percentage values. They could click this calculate totals button, and they should see the output to be total tip amount, the dollar value of the total tip amount, and then the total bill amount, which would be the original bill plus the tip, should show the total tip amount. So I'm going to build a ASP.NET Web Forms app that kind of looks like this. I'm not going to try to make it look exactly like this in the interest of time, but we'll try to get the basic concepts. So fire up Visual Studio, go to File, New Project. We're going to look for ASP.NET Web Forms, and I'm going to go ahead and call this Tippy. We're saving this to this location on my Mac. Make sure you know where you're saving the version that you might be creating. So we're going to go ahead and proceed with that. We hit OK. I'm going to choose empty, web forms. OK to proceed. Visual Studio is going to work on some magic. I'm going to give it some time to build my project template. So life is good. I've got my toolbox out here. I've got my output and my error list in here. It's well set up so I can actually see what's going on. Helps me work through a couple things. I've got my properties pad here, so I'll be able to set some properties of some controls that I have. And then I have my Solution Explorer where I see all my files. Now it's important that when I'm finished with this and I need to share it with somebody, I'm going to zip the entire project solution with all the files in it. But you probably already know that. So I'm going to close out this window. The first thing I want to do is create a simple ASP.NET web form. So I'm going to right click on the project, Tippy, go to add. We're going to add web form, and I'm going to go ahead and call it default. And we should create a web page called default.aspx. And I'm going to flip from the source view to design view since we're not really going to be writing HTML code. Now to implement this, I'm thinking I'm probably going to go ahead and just type in Tippy here. I could use a table to make this look a little bit nicer. In this video I'm going to skip the use of tables. I just want to build a very simple app pretty quickly, right? So some basic concepts I want you to maybe pay attention to is how we set up the drop-down list and how we wire up things in here. All right, so I'm going to get my first original bill amount. Ideally, I could put this in a label control, but I don't have to, so I'm not going to do that in this scenario. Then I'm going to look for a text box. It seems to me that this would be text input, so text box under the standard section should give me what I need. I hit enter twice. Then I'm going to type in tip percent, something more like that, and then I'm going to look for a drop-down list. Drop-down list would be used to set up this drop-down. Now, please pay attention to how we set this up. I'm going to kind of make this a little bit longer, kind of make it a little bit more consistent with this text box view. Then this little icon right next to the drop-down list, right to the right-hand side, I'm going to click on that. When I get this option for edit items, we're going to click on edit items to set up the list, right, the list of values in the drop-down. So this is blank. I'm going to click on add, and I get this list item, the first item in here. I could set the text value, which is the value that I want a user to see. It might be different from the value that I'm going to use for calculations in my code. So pay attention to what I do here. I'm going to set this to 20%, but then the value I'm going to make just 20. That's because I don't want to mess around with stripping out the percentage value when I need to do a calculation, right? So this is fine. I'm going to go ahead and set that as a selected value. That means that would be the default value that shows. So in our mockup, 20% was actually the default. So I'm trying to do exactly that, right? And it is enabled. So I'm going to go ahead and click add again. This time I'm going to put in 15%. But the value that I'm going to use for calculations will be just plain old 15. It's not that selected default value, so I'm going to leave that false. I go ahead and add another one. This time it will be 10%. Value to be used is 10. I'm going to do another one, 5%. The requirement of this app is just these four options, sorry. All right, so this looks good to me. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And you can see I've got this drop-down list. When I play this in runtime, you're going to see the option to select the options in the drop-down. For now, we're going to see the default value set to 20%, which is pretty close to that. We don't have the opportunity to do a watermark, 0.0.0 in the text box. It takes a little bit more code and CSS to do that type of thing. So let's ignore that part for now. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter twice. I'm going to add a button control. So I need a button, and that button is going to say calculate totals. And so I'm going to select that, move to my properties pad. I'm looking for the .text property, right? I'm going to change that to calculate totals. That looks good. Let's go ahead and do some stuff with these colors here. I think we wanted to go with a white full color. I think I might want to do something with the back color to maybe just a little bit closer to the design. Seems fairly close. Maybe we'll make that bold, something more like that. I mean, it's not exactly like that, but you get the concept. Now the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually have, I could just type in total tip. I would recommend you use a table to control this, unless you know CSS, then you can do a little bit more with that. So I'm going to do this, total amount, something like that. And then I'm going to have total bill amount, something much like this. And I'm going to plug in two label controls in here. Probably won't look quite as good as I needed to. Ideally, if I had a table, I can organize this a little bit better, but we're just focusing on the concepts. So I'm going to bring in a label control, plug that in here, bring in another label control. Label controls are for read-only text. And the default text value is going to be 000, kind of indicating that this is what a user is going to see by default when the page first starts, right? So that looks about right to me. I could probably change the color a little bit, maybe. Let's go something like that, perhaps. Kind of differentiate that a little bit. Go crazy with your design. This looks about right to me. So this is my user interface. I Control S to save. I'm going to try to select everything. Kind of change the font a little bit, just reminding you of some of the things you could do. So we're going to go into font here. Might try this. That looks pretty good. I like it. It's a lot nicer to me. Command B to make this a little bit bigger, bold. You can control it as you see fit. So this looks like a good design. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick all these controls, right? I've got a couple controls in here, 5 controls, and give them a unique ID value that I'm going to write some code against in my code behind. So Control S to save. I'm going to select my text box, and I'm going all the way down to ID, right? And I'm going to, ideally, I would have TXT, but in this case, I'm going to, I think for your assignment, you're going to use your initial. My initial is IA, so you want to use your initial as a prefix. Get in the habit of doing that for now, for this class. In the real world, you wouldn't have to do that. So I'll do IA. I'm still going to go ahead with TXT, meaning that it's a text box, and this is going to be text box bill, bill amount. Right, so this is the name of my control, text box bill amount. Then I'm going to give this drop-down list an ID. So this guy is going to be DDL. But I'm going to start with my initial first, IA DDL, tip. That sounds good enough for me. So IA DDL tip. Let's make sure we get that right. All right, my button control, I'm going to name that. That's going to be BTN. Actually, I need IA BTN button calculate totals, right? So IA BTN calculate totals. That's the name of my button. Then I need to set this output. So these are my input values. I want this to be a little bit bigger, actually. Kind of lost that somehow. Not quite sure what happened. Then I want this guy, this label control, to be IA. LBL is your prefix for label controls. So label tip total, right? Something like that. And this guy is going to have a name, IA LBL bill total. Right, so now I've got ID values for each of these controls. I've got 5 different controls on here. I'm going to try to run this first. Get in the habit of testing. You don't want to write code as you would write a book or an essay. You want to try to test very frequently in case something breaks. You get a chance to fix it before you proceed and add more complexity. So I'm going to test this in Chrome. Fire this thing up. And we'll give it some time here. See if I can make this a little bit smaller. It might take a while to paint my screen. So this guy is a little bit slower. Typically test in a different browser, but let's see if we get this guy going. All right, so we've got something like this. I could probably type in 50. I get my drop-down options. I could click this button, but it does nothing at the moment, and this is 0. And it looks good to me. It's good enough for what we need to do. Right, so we're going to go ahead and proceed with this. I'm going to close out of this, or stop it, and I need to create an event handler for the calculate button. Let's make this just a little bit longer, maybe. Okay, so to create an event handler for the calculate method, I simply need to double click the button, right? Well, a couple different ways to do it, but this is the easiest way to do it. So double click the calculate button, totals button, and I get something much like this. I'm going to hide this and make my screen a little bit smaller so you can see what's going on. Let's hide my properties, make things a little bit larger. So by default, I've got my Tippy namespace, which is the name of the app. I have the default page, default.aspx. It creates a partial class, if you will, which inherits from the page class. Now, this page class actually comes from system.web.ui namespace, right? So you see system .web.ui, that's the namespace, and this class is in that namespace. So I can use a piece of code that Microsoft wrote. For this app, I don't need to do anything on page load, so I'm going to leave this event handler as is. Notice this is a protected void method, so it returns nothing and is protected because we can use some of the methods in this page class, which page load is part of, and I click event handler. So this is the name of my button, right? Underscore click, which kind of shows that this button has a click event. It takes a couple arguments, object, sender, event arguments, E. Don't worry too much about that. We don't need to waste time on that. Typically, the way I like to approach this, if you're building a calculator app of some sort, I would like to create some steps. So step 1, get input values and store in variables, right? So that's step 1. Step 2, we're going to declare, let me label that as step 2, declare variables for output. In this case, there are 2 inputs: original bill amount, the tip percentage, and then the total tip amount is an output. We're going to need to display the output of that, and then we're going to need to display total bill amount. So those are outputs, right? So we're going to declare variables to hold those, declare variables to hold the inputs, and then once we've got that, we're going to move on to step 3, where we perform calculation. And then step 4, we display the results, right? So those 4-step approach to solve this problem. Not too challenging. If you get these in your head, life is going to be a lot easier when you're building these types of apps, right? So we're going to go ahead and declare some variables. The first variable is going to hold this value. So I'm going to say, I could go with something like double. I'm going to choose a double type because we are going to allow people to type in decimal numbers in this case, right? So double, float, decimal, those are floating point number types. So we're going to create a variable called bill. Double bill is going to be equal to, I happen to know that the value of this guy, this text box, is going to start with IA TXT. So now IntelliSense is going to suggest that. I can hit enter or select that. And I know the actual value that they're going to type in is held in the .text property, right? So I'm going to choose that. Now notice I get this error message, cannot implicitly convert type string to double. That is because when I hover over .text, notice it shows string textbox.text. That means this text property is a string. I can't assign strings to double, so I need to convert this to a double first. Right? I'm going to use double.parse, right? Eventually, when we learn if statements, you would be able to do some error handling. So if somebody types in a value that's not a number or not a double, you can show a user-friendly error message, that type of thing. Don't worry too much about that yet. So this is going to create a variable called bill. Bill is going to be assigned the value that the user is going to type in this text box, which is this name. And the text property specifically is what holds what the user typed in. That is a string. I'm going to convert this string to a double, assign it to this bucket or variable, if you will, called double. So hopefully that makes sense. The next thing we're going to do here is we're going to create tip percent. Now I happen to know, I defined, this is from a drop-down list. So the predefined numbers that I have are all integers. So I'm going to use an integer type, int. So I'm going to do int tip. ideally tip percent, but I'm going to keep these variable names short. So tip is going to be int that parse. I happen to know left-hand side must match the right-hand side data type. So I'm going to create this. Int that whatever I come up with needs to be parsed to an int. Int, this is going to work. Double, that's going to work, right? So let's figure out what the drop-down name is. So that is IA, I believe DDL tip. I could do .text, but that's not going to get me what I need. That's going to get me the value that is actually displayed to the user, which is 20%, right? I need to get the actual 20 integer value because 20% cannot be converted to an int with the percentage signs because it's a special character. So the property you want to use in this case is selected value, right? So this is probably the only time we're using a property that's not .text for web form control, right? Server controls, we'll call those. So this is the name of the drop-down list, .selected value. That would get me the 20 value that I selected, right? So I'm going to save. Let me go ahead and save. Click on Save All, make sure everything is saved. So we're going to move on to step 2. So step 1 is done. These are my input values or variables. I've created variables to hold them, and I've converted them to the right data types, right? So make sure you convert them to the right data types. Next step is to create some variables. So I happen to know the output of this calculation, this and this, is going to be another double. This is also going to be a double. So you have to do that type of forward thinking ahead of time. So I'm going to call that double tip total. Okay, that's going to be the variable that holds the tip total. I'm just going to declare that. I won't initialize it to anything. It's got nothing by default, right? So then I'll do another double, which would be bill total. And step 2 is complete. Step 3, we're going to actually perform the calculation. So I'm now going to say tip total. The tip total variable is going to be assigned bill times tip divided by 100. I'm going to put this in parentheses just to indicate that what we're trying to do here is tip is not going to come in with the percentage sign. Notice back here, let me actually split my screen perhaps so you could see that. Back here, if we go back to edit items, this 20% has 20 as the value. This is the 20 that I'm going to see in my code. This is what the user is going to see on the screen, but in my code behind, this is the value that's going to be available in selected value, right? So that's what I want to work with. So that value I need to divide by 100 to get the percentage equivalent, right? So 20% would be 0.02, something like that. Then I'm going to multiply that by the bill amount double value that was entered in to get the tip total. Hopefully that makes sense to you. The other calculation I need to perform is bill total. So bill total is going to be something more like this. Bill total is going to be the original bill plus the tip total, right? So tip total is how much the tip is going to be. This is the original bill variable, right? I'm going to add this new total of the tip to that and plug that into this variable called bill total. Now there's so many ways to do this, right? You could do something like bill plus, you could do something more like this. I'm going to comment it out because I'm not actually going to use it. So this would have been equal to bill something like 1 plus tip divided by 100, something like that. Right, so this would be bill times 1, which would be bill plus bill times tip divided by 100. If you're comfortable with math, this would make sense. If you're not, it doesn't matter. Keep it simple, right? Next thing we're going to do here is we're going to display this in the screen. So because we're using label controls here, please remember we're not going to use console.writeLine. We're going to display this in a label. So I need to figure out the name of the label, just IA, tip total, LBL tip total, .text. The .text property of it, right, is what's going to display this. And then I'm going to do tip total, which is the name of my variable. But I want to show the $sign in front of this. And you probably know by now you could do that with tip total.toString, quote C, or so many other ways to do that. That would put the $sign in front of the value. But I need to convert this to a string regardless. .text is string. Hover over it. It tells you it's a string. String label .text. So you know this is a string. This is a double if you hover over it. Now we're going to convert it to a string. So double toString. So the right-hand side matches the left-hand side, right? In terms of data types. Next thing I want to do is show the other values. So IA, LBL, bill total .text. The text property specifically is what I'm going to assign this to, and that would be bill total. I'm going to toString that, quote C, and that, right? So go back to my code. I've got a few lines of code. Step 1, I created my input variables, converted them to the right data types. I created some placeholders for my output variables, right? Then I performed the calculations that I needed to do. Notice I split this algorithm into two separate parts. So I did tip total first. In this case, I needed to do that, but even if it was too complicated, I would take this step to break down my code into smaller chunks. That's good problem solving skills. Now, if you were a more advanced developer, you probably built the whole thing on one line. That's fine. As we're learning how to do this at this stage, it's a good idea to try to break up complicated algorithms into smaller chunks so you can troubleshoot in case something goes wrong, right? So now we're going to test this. I guess I'll stick with Google Chrome. Hopefully it loads a little bit faster this time. I'm running this on my Mac, so sometimes it's a little bit slower. So let's go with the $100 bill. 20% tip. Calculate. And I get $100. Well, that's not good. So let's troubleshoot what went wrong. Breaking my code. It would make more sense to convert this guy to a double, even though the input value is here, because the output is going to be double. So when we divide this value, which is now a double, by 100 and multiply it by another double, we could kind of get rid of the rounding and things like that. We're kind of losing the rounding in here, right? So now we're going to test this again. So make sure, it might be a good idea to make everything double, right? That way you don't have to deal with rounding errors. Let's go ahead and fire this up again. Try it out. Let's close out of this guy. All right, so we're up and running. Let's go with $100, 20% tip. Calculate. I get $20 tip, 120 total. Let's try with 15%. Seems to be working. 10%. That's working. Try with 5%. That's working. Let's change the bill amount to maybe a $75 bill with a 10% tip. I get something like that. It looks about right. So this concludes the video. This is a very simple app, but it gets you into the basic concepts of building web forms. So hopefully you enjoy it. Reach out if you have any questions.